talked about a, I'm sorry,
I'm not in Congress. I've never been to Washington,
I'm
D.C.
sorry, Ms. Steele.
You should know that.
Ms. Steele, you talked about a 4 or 5 year plan to balance the federal budget. Right now, the federal budget is out of balance by about 1/3 of its revenue. How do you do that without raising additional revenue?
You freeze spending at 2008 levels. I grew the military and the veterans benefits at the normal CBO rate. I added in some reforms to Medicare, which was raising the eligibility age to both Medicare and Social Security. A couple other reforms, tort reform, pharmaceutical rebates, and I believe that was it. Kept the Bush tax cuts and balanced it by 2017.
So there are
and you have to know, this is a top-down approach. I'm not privy to all the information from the bottom up. So.
Okay. Well, this doesn't sound like, eliminate the EPA or eliminate...
No, it was just an across-the-board freeze at 2008 levels.
Would you support the eliminations that Congressman Megan talked about, like the EPA, energy, and education?
I think we need to move the responsibilities of the Department of Education back to the states when it's elementary and secondary level.
Would you support eliminating the federal level?
Yeah, I probably would. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned antitrust laws expanding antitrust laws. Is that not another regulation on insurance companies?
No, they are exempt from the current antitrust laws today. Let's put them back under there. How can you have competitiveness among insurance companies if they're exempt from the antitrust laws? In other words, the antitrust laws exist to break up monopolies.
Ms. Steeling, Rachel Harris from the Legacy of Legalwood. I was wondering, what is your take on military veterans and military veterans' families? Do you have any plans for TRICARE, retirement at any cost or anything? Do you have any plans for retirement or TRICARE, keeping it within the budget?
Well, I know that they've increased the cost on military, and I don't think that's right. So I think we need to put that as a priority, that we keep, benefits to veterans and the current benefits that exist to people in the military now, and keep them at reasonable costs instead of raising them.
Another question?
Sir,
As you look at this race, what do you think is the most challenging part of the Republican primary for you? Are you having trouble getting your message out? Do you think you're reaching people? Is it raising money?
Well, when you're running against somebody who wants to buy the Senate seat with his checkbook open, that's always a challenge. And so, but aside from that, I'm out there listening and talking to people, and I believe that the people of this country are sick of the direction that Washington is headed. They're sick of the same old politics as usual, just like that, spending money and beating you up on TV, negative ads. I think people are sick of that. So I have faith that the voters will send a strong message, both in the fall and in August, on August 7th.
Should you be elected to the U.S. Senate, would you vote to maintain the current Senate leadership in the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell, for example, or would you look for somebody new?
I am going to look for the person who's the most conservative and who also recognizes that we have to balance the budget, that we have to cut spending, that we have to reduce the size of government. And those are going to be those 3 important things. I'm going to look for the most conservative person to do that.
During the debate tonight, nobody brought up the latest attack ad from Mr. Bruner that takes on both yourself and Congressman Aiken. Why didn't you bring up that ad to try to correct the record when he's saying that you voted to balloon the state's debt and spend money on pork barrel projects? And is the ad something that you feel you can defend yourself against?
Yeah, the ad is completely misleading, and it's not true with regard to what he's saying about me. And I noticed that he mentioned in his response to the Supreme Court question who he would want on the Supreme Court, that they needed to have a track record. Well, you know, at the same time he's saying that, his track record is pretty much non-existent. Now, if he says it's his business experience that's his track record, you have to look at that and ask what it is. First of all, it'd be nice if he'd open up his books because he keeps referring to it and nobody knows what he's talking about. And secondly, we do know that he used junk bonds himself in his own business to run Vijon. Junk bonds, I might add, that's debt. At the same time, he's saying that people don't use debt. You know, he's made this comment several times before about not using debt to balance budgets. Now, with regard to what he's saying about me, that's totally untrue. We have a balanced budget in this state. We kept our AAA rating. We use bonds as a tool to leverage our state's assets and to build infrastructure, highways, schools, etc. And we do so in a very conservative and prudent manner. And so I would say that the track record that I have in keeping the AAA rating and state treasurer in the state and making sure that we had balanced budgets. I never voted for a budget that wasn't balanced because they have to be. So his insinuation is misleading and does not characterize correctly the state of Missouri. So either one, he just doesn't understand, state finances, or he's just intentionally not telling the truth.
One of those pieces of legislation actually was to borrow money to finance buildings that had already been constructed, but which the final payments had not been made at a time when the state was in a cash crisis. So we were borrowing money for something we already had money set aside for, that was revenue. And so that we could take the money that was set aside for those buildings and spend it on ongoing operations. Essentially, borrowing money to fund ongoing operations in a way. Why is it not the same thing that the federal government does?
If you will recall, at the time it was post 9/11, were you there?
No, I wasn't.
And the revenue estimates were seriously wrong. And so yes, the money that was plugged a hole in a shortfall in that revenue estimate for that year. We kept our AAA rating, we balanced the budget, and we conducted the state finances prudently and conservatively. What happens in Washington is they just continue to rack up unsustainable debt over and over and over again and do nothing at all to balance the budget or cut government or act in any prudent or conservative way. When the AAA rating was up, they just totally ignored it, downgraded the United States of America's bond rating has been downgraded, and Washington did nothing.
One more question, please.
Sir, can I ask you about Congressman Blunt this week, or Senator Blunt, I guess now, came out this week and said that he'd be for extending the provision in the healthcare legislation for high-risk pools and for high-risk pools for people who are at risk.
High-risk pools.
Right, as well as for children or people under 26 to stay on their parents' insurance. Would you be in favor of extending those two provisions of the healthcare law?
We have to repeal Obamacare. That's what I'm in favor of.
That's not what I ask you. Sorry, I'm asking if you support
Then we
this
have to
change.
start all over again. And, then we can talk about those things.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
My name is Patrick Tui. I'm the spokesman for the campaign. I'll be here after all three candidates have an opportunity to talk if you have additional questions. Thank you.
Mr. Bruner? All right. So if you'd like to sit down, you got it set up there. All right. Thank you. All right, first question. Who would like to ask the first question? Go ahead.
I'll go ahead and start, John. I asked Sarah this just a second ago. Roy Blunt came out this week and said he would be in favor of repealing the healthcare law, but keeping the provision that allowed people under 26 to have their insurance as well as high-risk pools. Would you be in favor of extending those two provisions of the healthcare law if you repeal the rest of it?
No, I tell you, my issue is real clear from the debate. There's sometimes the time when you have to take the whole structure down and start from the beginning and rebuild. I'm always concerned when you take an issue, even if it has merits on its own, and try to rebuild from those couple particular issues. So maybe procedurally, I would differ from the senator and starting from the ground zero and rebuilding again.
Next.
Mr. Bruner, during the debate, you said about Supreme Court justices, we don't need nobody with no record that we can, so saying we need to be able to check what their decisions as a judge to understand where they're going to go. Why should Missourians accept someone who's never held political office if that's your standard for a Supreme Court judge?
Well, you have a very particular issue. You have to understand what is the problem and what is the person that you're going to put in to solve that particular problem. Obviously, we have a court system that requires a certain skill level to serve in that particular area. It doesn't need to have those particular skills, but I would say it would be a very positive element to have those skills to serve, and particularly with the Supreme Court, the original intention of the Constitution, and not to create laws from the bench. Right now, we have a serious economic problem in our country. We have debt and spending. We're losing jobs. It's not getting better. I hope it would. I wish it would. But hope and wishing is not a plan. You have to have a plan. And I've had some very good dialogue with one other person who hasn't run the public office before, Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. He's done a stellar job up there with his background and experience in manufacturing. He related to me some time back, he said, the problem we have in Washington, D.C. is far too many of our elected officials wake up every morning to figure out how they put their name on a bill or a plan or a building, on a plan, excuse me, a bill or a building or on the news cycle. They're not thinking about budgets. They're not thinking long term. They're not thinking, as business people do, that we have to have structure. We have to have budgets. So these are the skills that I've had that I can bring to Washington to help support people like Ron Johnson. We have other people who do have other business experiences up there as well that are asking for help. Senator Tom Coburn, not just a medical doctor, but he has those business skills brought to Washington, D.C. So, Bob
But we're
Corker,
talking about the courts, and some of our most distinguished justices have come from private practice and law schools and have never sat on a bench until they were put on an appeals court or the United States Supreme Court. So why do we need justices that have a record as judges?
well, I think I'm going historically back that we've had a lack of clarity in some of these hearings that have been held. And so as a private citizen, I'd like to have a better understanding precisely on how they would rule on the concept of the original intention of the Constitution.
So you're running some commercials highly critical of your opponents here. And Ms. Steelman just responded to your charge that she made poor choices in voting for what she says will always balance budgets, kept the AAA rating of the state, and they were very prudent choices that the legislature made at the time.
Well, I made no charges about failure to balance the budget or AAA ratings. That was never part of the discourse. It was very, very simple here. You know, as you look at the issues and the financial issues there in terms of cutting the spending and balancing a budget, you can do that by better long-term planning. You can do that by setting the right budget priorities, by having resources in reserve. And in this particular situation, where they put in a $400 million bond within the last 2 weeks of the legislative session, with over $150 million being available instantaneously, the purpose of that was to cover the deficit spending. In fact, one of the state legislators said if we continue to do things like this, we might as well remove the balanced budget amendment. So it's the process that goes by, this short-term thinking that goes on. My word, we're here at the end, we need money, let's use debt. That is not the kind of thinking and planning that we need to take to Washington, D.C.
Mr. Mayor, something that's very interesting, you are a businessman. What I was wondering is, there's certain industries that are dying. For example, automotive. Automotive industry is being built by machines that's for a machine. What do you have plans for people that are losing these jobs and ultimately losing the industry to machines? Do you have any plans for people that are losing their jobs, and what would you do with them?
Well, I'll tell you the experience. I go back my 30 years in manufacturing. I remember the first, I call automatic production line we bought. We were able to drive the business and improve our sales, that those individuals could be retrained within the company. For 31 years, not one hourly person ever lost an hour of work. So if the business is growing, and people love to go to businesses and industries that are growing because there's more choices, more opportunities, more training. In fact, one of the toughest things that I had was to continue to find good people to come to work. Now, we were in a tough enterprise zone, one of the most depressed areas of St. Louis, and so that in itself is a challenge. We ended up becoming almost the only industry left there. So I looked at our associates as family and how we can continue to go forward. So every time we brought in a new piece of equipment, everybody was excited because they knew the company was going to grow and there'd be more jobs for everybody. So we grew from 40 individuals to 1,400 individuals. Short term, there could be an issue, but it's how you treat your associates and your employees, and you provide those opportunities for them to go forward. I always loved the opportunity to promote from within whenever I could.
John, I want to get back to the ad because I know we're all thrilled about talking about it still. Sarah Steelman said when she was sitting there right in front of you, we do know that he used junk bonds himself in his own business. She's saying that you use debt to finance projects in your business. So is that a skill that you're going to be taking to Washington with using debt?
Well, again, I'm afraid Treasurer Steelman's misinformed, and we did not use junk bonds. Again, when you cannot defend your record, you have a tendency of throwing flak out as a distraction. I think the military has some of those anti-missile warfare systems on the side, but you know, the difference between government and private business is accountability and risk. When I take out a loan and we put together a detailed plan, and there's always more opportunities in plan in terms of our capital budget plans or improvement plans, and we had the return on investment justification there, and guess who signed on those notes and loans? Many times in the early part of the business, it was my personal guarantee. If I made the wrong decision, I was held accountable, and I was assuming the risk. Now, the problem with too many of our elected officials that they're awfully free handling other people's money, the money of the citizens of Missouri in this case, or in the federal case, the money of the citizens of our country. So there's a complete difference in terms of risk, in terms of accountability, and finally, the only accountability that we have with our elected officials at this point is to vote them out of office or not re-elect them to go in to do the same thing again.
Your campaign put out a list, getting back to this ad, in which you talked about what you're using to back this ad up. And on Ms. Steelman, it's voted to put Missouri billions in debt and back millions in pork barrel projects just like they do in Washington. And what I see here is money, the biggest chunk of it, is money for infrastructure development of the state of Missouri, and then money for capital improvements projects such as the state capitol building, important state installations. What is wrong with infrastructure spending or infrastructure borrowing?
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There was nothing wrong with that in my business. But
then why are you criticizing?
Well, you have the difference between what I would call the regular budgetary process. Then you have the supplemental process of bills. These are the pork barrel things that come in at the last minute that are not part of the regular budgetary process. We need to get our state government and our federal government back into long-term planning with a long-term approach, not to throw hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars in after the primary budgetary process has gone forward, because that's how the state got into problem. They all rushed in with their special programs after the regular budgetary process, went after their favorite programs, we ran out of money, and then we had to bring in debt to solve the problem. So on its own merits, no, it is a process that needs to be fixed, and this is where someone who's had some business or industry experience can come in there and say, there's a right way to do the right thing. And that's what I offer in my role here as a potential U.S. Senator.
John, why are you running ads against your Republican opponents now instead of Claire McCaskill? Because you were running against McCaskill for a long time, now you're focusing on your Republicans again.
Well,
What's the
you
strategy
know,
there?
of course, we do have a primary. I've been focused on Claire McCaskill from day one. I know she's going to be a tough competitor. She's been in politics for 30 years. But it's important at this point in the campaign to be able to differentiate myself from the other career politicians. Sarah Steelman has been in office or running for office for 15 years. Congressman Aiken has been doing it for 25 years. John, what sets you different? And I tell you, it is those issues going back to debt and spending that are absolutely critical that need to be addressed. I've had many years' experience dealing with those issues the right way. Yes, I've made a few mistakes along the way, and I've learned from those mistakes, but it's absolutely critical that we return sound planning and budgetary processes back to our state and back to the federal government.
Okay,
All right, guys, thanks a
that's
lot.
it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
You all getting the points for being here late, huh?
Oh, absolutely. We have a question right here. First question to start off.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Christy Fletcher from the Legacy Women's newspaper,
Yeah, Christy.
and I'm going to be a teacher.
Right.
And you said that you're going to cut budgets for education. Now, as being from an education background, my mom's a teacher, my whole family's a teacher, what do you mean by cutting money? Because my mom's school has no money, she herself has to spend lots of money, and she doesn't have enough income to support that. So what do you mean by cutting money from education?
Well, I didn't mean cutting anything to do with state education, okay? And I believe you're talking about state education, right? What I was saying is, I don't believe the federal Department of Education contributes anything to education whatsoever. I think if you just got rid of the federal Department of Education, you'd have better local control of schools. You could do that with your, and if you are really worried about having more structure, you still got the State Department of Education. But I just don't see the point of the federal government being involved in trying to direct, because they have a very small amount of money they give us, but a tremendous amount of red tape that makes it very hard to teach. I think if the Department of Education were gone, you as a teacher would find your job would be much more rewarding, and you could teach better without a lot of red tape and bureaucracy.
Congressman, I want to ask about school lunches. How would you pay for school lunches if you didn't have the federal government involved anymore? Could states handle that?
What's that?
Could states handle that?
Yeah, I think so, if they chose to do it. It's up to the states to figure out what they want to do. Why should the federal government jump into something that a state could easily solve the problem? We talk a lot about federalism, about the federal government being involved in too much stuff. Why does the federal government have to jump into food? Why does the federal government have to tell us what size soda pop you can drink? Or whether you can eat this kind of food? Don't you think the states at a minimum could handle that? And maybe people with some real freedom could do it?
Let me go to Calhoun.
Yeah.
Following her question, you said that you believe that the federal government contributes nothing to educational funding, correct?
No, I think that in general, if you had no federal Department of Education, okay, if you didn't have that at all, and you allowed the states to do it, we would be better off. That's my point.
But with I'm a broke college student, obviously.
Okay.
And over the years, what's been helping me pay for my education has been the Pell Grant, which I qualify for. And in 2011, the Pell Grant was extended to $5,400. And also, I rely on my federal subsidized and unsubsidized.
Are you talking about your college education?
Yes.
Okay. I'm talking about the Department of Education. I'm talking about primarily what it's doing in primary and secondary education. If you want to talk about funding for colleges and things like that, that's a separate, I think that's a separate issue.
But what I want to know is that would you keep those programs in place? Would you have better programs in place, or would you just get rid of them all and start over?
Well, I think that as much as possible, the principle that I've been trying to communicate, and I try to make basic principles as I was doing the debate, and one of the principles is the idea that I think education is a local kind of thing. And I think it's better when it's done at a local level. And everything that I've seen, for instance, I voted against No Child Left Behind, right? Now you ask the teachers, this was supposed to put accountability into schools and all that kind of thing. You ask the teachers, how did you like that level of federal involvement in the classroom? And most of them will tell you, it didn't work very well. And that's my point, is I think that there's a lot of things. Look, when we started, the federal government did almost nothing. Now it's involved in everything under the sun. I just don't think we do a good job of that. So that's my point. Close out the Federal Department of Education.
What is your policies with college education? You are obviously at a local university in St. Charles, Missouri.
Right.
This Lindenwood is a great university. It is a private college.
Right.
But we still rely on federal planning. Do you have any plans?
You rely on federal loans, you mean?
Yes, I do.
Right.
As Kelsey has said, I use the Pell Grant, I use the unsubsidized loan, and I also use outside scholarships from the Marine Corps for my father's service.
Right.
Obviously, I can't pay for a plus parent loan by myself. So what would you have plans for us as college students for education?
Well, you know, my belief is that in the past, what happened before Obama came along, and before Obamacare, I didn't actually realize that this is part of Obamacare, okay, is that there were all kinds of private people that would loan you money for school, okay? But they decided, we're going to kick all the privates out. This is just another step towards socialism, okay? We're just government's taking over all the health care. It's going to take over student loans. That's about $1 trillion. That's a lot of money. Federal government's going to take it over. You wait in a couple of years and see how well that program works, okay? Every time the federal government gets involved in something, it's like parking an old car in your yard. It just kills everything underneath it. I think we do much better, and if you take a look, a lot of students chose to use the private loans, even though the percentage on them were a little higher, because they got much, much better service. Okay? And what happened was all those people have been kicked out in the last 2 years.
Congressman Aiken, you got a bill that's coming up that's going to extend the current subsidized interest rate on student loans at 3.4%, or it's going to expire, and the interest rate on student loans will double. And as everybody knows, if you're borrowing money and you're not paying it back the way students do, they borrow money and then they build up a large principal. Then that interest rate is going to hit them when they get out of school. Are you going to vote to continue, and this is in the current Congress, the subsidized loan rates at 3.4%, are you going to allow them to rise back to the market levels?
Oh, well, you know, you can just check my record.
Well,
I already voted.
Okay, you already voted, and you voted too?
I voted for the fact that the interest rate stayed at a lower level, and we took the money out of Obamacare. That was the vote I had to take. I voted yes on it.
If the money wasn't connected like that, would you extend the rates, Congressman?
What's that?
If the money wasn't connected like through the healthcare legislation, would you extend the rates?
That's a good question, and I don't agree with the premise of the thing, as I've said about 4 times over. I just don't think the government should be in the student loan business, okay? I think that should be something that's done by the private. Now look, everybody wants the government to give them free thises and free that's. That's where we are. And the fact of the matter is, right now, you take a look at where our government is. Think about this now. To all of you that are students, think about what this means. All of the basic functions of the federal government right now are all financed by debt. Let me put it another way. Let's talk about what you'd have to cut to balance the budget. Okay? Let's think about this. All of defense, every last bit, not a tank, not a ship, not a plane, it's all gone. You have a balanced budget? No, not nearly. Well, let's see, what else do we need to cut? Air traffic controllers, CIA, FBI, parks, prisons. We're going to get rid of the Department of Energy, Justice, Commerce, Labor, Education, all of those different departments. Get rid of all of that stuff. Is it balanced yet? No. So what are we going to get rid of next? We get rid of the Capitol building. We get rid of the White House. We get rid of a bunch of these office buildings. And when you get just about to that point, you got a balanced budget. Now, how much more stuff can the government get into? We just can't afford all this. You've got to decide where you're going to go on this whole thing. And that's the principle that I was trying to drive at. Everybody wants to talk about process. The principle of the thing is the government is trying to do way, way, way too much. Now, you know, there was a point made by my opponent that I thought was particularly interesting. He said, relative to the Supreme Court, no bodies with no records. We don't want people in the Supreme Court. We don't really know what they're going to do. We want bodies with records. You know, I thought it was a good point. I think it applies pretty well to the U.S. Senate as well.
Right here in front.
Okay, lot of talk about education. I'd like to talk about the quality of education from the federal level, and you've talked about eliminating the Department of Education. What would you do to eliminate race to the top and, moreover, the extended reach of the Common Core standards beyond the public school sector into the private school sector and the homeschooling sector?
Give me more detail on that.
Well, Common Core standards, almost adopted by every state in the union, driven on assessments based on federal funding, you know, from the federal government, now has reached into the college level. So now homeschool students and private school students will need to pass assessments to get into college based on Common Core standard assessments. All of this is being driven by race to the top. So how would you address that on the federal level?
Well, I don't think that the federal government should be determining standards for what makes people smart or what they ought to learn. I don't think the federal government has any competency in that whatsoever. Who's to say what one person should know and what another person should know? It depends on what your dream is, where you're going, and what you want to achieve. If you take a look, let's say you get 10 of your smartest people in this campus, pick your desk professors or whatever you want, your 10 smartest students, and start graphing, what do you know about this, what do you know about this, what do you know about this? You'll find that people choose to learn about different things. Why do we want the federal government to tell us what we should think or what we should know? It's just bizarre. You know, basic fundamental things of can you read and can you do basic math problems and things like that, we test for those. You don't have to have the federal government to tell whether you can read, whether you can solve a math problem or something. It just isn't the case. But one of the things that I've seen in spending a lot of time in education through the years, and that I've, you know, did my engineering degree and then a lot of training at IBM and then a Master of Divinity degree and other miscellaneous things with the military as well, and then homeschooling our kids. But one of the things we've seen is kids are different. The stuff they need to know is different. I've got one kid who's a superstar. She's going to be a senior year at Hillsdale College. When we set her up there, we didn't know that she was great at art. She became an art major. There's a whole lot of stuff she knows that most people don't know. She knows how to put paint on canvas. She knows how to shade things and do things because that's what makes her tick. But why is the government going to tell us who should know this or who should know that? I would agree with the premise. It's just the fact I told you I'm the most conservative congressman in Missouri. There's a reason for that. I want the federal government doing all these things, okay? In education or anything else.
One more question for you, Kelsey.
Anything, Sam?
On the topic of health care,
sure.
You've recently signed a bill through Congress called the SAFE Act, which is looking to repeal Title I of the Affordable Health Care Act because of its abortion funding, correct?
The bill that we made, that was the SAFE Act, which we introduced a couple of weeks ago, basically followed the same federal policies that were in place before and probably should have applied to the multi-state exchanges. And that was the one that was put in by, the congressman from Illinois, now left. I don't remember off the top of my head, but there were two different federal laws that made it clear that we weren't going to use federal money to do abortions. Okay. Now, with the passage of Obamacare, it became clear that the agencies were trying to write the law so that the multi-state exchanges. That's what my bill prevented that from happening. I don't think it had any other side effects particularly.
But Title I, as far as I've looked into it, only pertains to medical coverage. And not only that, but Obama issued a letter on March 24, 2010, stating that abortions would not be funded with federal money unless it pertained into cases of rape, incest, or if the pregnancy endangered the woman's life. So I'm wondering, what exactly are you trying to repeal here with the abortion laws?
Well, the actual law is online. You could look it up and see. And Obama's promises in this regard I consider to be about as useless as they're useless because he doesn't keep his word. He said this Obamacare is not going to have any federal funding for abortions, and then here we go with the agency basically setting it up so it can be. I don't trust him.
Okay, one short question.
All right, thank you. I just wanted, you talked about food stamps on stage, and I just wondered, Would you be in favor of just ending federal food stamps, period?
I think in a lot of cases where you have the federal government with an extensive involvement in some program, I think it's very disruptive and probably very difficult to just cold turkey say, oh, we're not going to do this, not going to do that. And so I think that probably sort of a phased solution is probably what makes a lot of sense. They've been phased up by 68% in a couple of years. They can sure be phased down some.
Okay,
Could I get one other question?
are you,
Betsy gets some questions.
okay, this is the last question, all right.
Congressman, in terms of this race, where do you see yourself and why do you think you're the better choice over the two opponents tonight?
Well, I thank you for asking that question, and it was really the point that Bruner made in the debate when he said no bodies with no records. I don't want somebody in the Supreme Court, we don't have any clue, they have no real record of what they're going to be like. And I believe that that's what I have to offer in this race. I have a proven conservative record. You could say, Aiken, you may have been too conservative some years ago, but when you take a look at where we are in terms of federal deficit, the thing that I have is a proven, principle-driven record. And that does not come for free. The very first vote I took against the brand new president isn't the way you make friends and influence enemies. It's not the way to raise the most money and be the most secure congressman to tell one of your biggest contributors that tells you you've got to vote against the Wall Street bailout and to vote no on it. Those votes all come at a cost. And yet I've been reelected time after time because I've stood on principle and people know my vote's not for sale. And I believe that Bruner's point, no bodies with no records, I've got the record. I've got the proven conservative record. I've got the votes against my own party on various times to show that I'd be an independent voice in the Senate. And people who want a conservative, I'd be their choice. If you want sort of a very moderate or squishy person, then you don't want to vote for me.
All right, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.